My name is Christine Ha. I'm from Huston, Texas, and I am best known for being the blind cook that won season 3 of Masterchef on Fox.
Howdy, and thanks for learning about MS with me, Aaron Boster. I am absolutely delighted to bring to you Christine Ha, who looks like a normal human, but she's actually kind of superhuman. Christine has a condition which is a cousin of multiple sclerosis called Neuromyelitis Optica Spectrum Disorder. And I'm so happy and appreciative that Christine can join us today to teach us a little bit from her own personal experience. Thank you so much for joining me on the channel today.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Now, if you wouldn't mind, just by way of introduction, not everybody might know you. Now, anyone in the food world knows you, but if you could just do a quick introduction so that folks on the channel can get to know who you are.
Sure. My name is Christine Ha. I'm from Huston, Texas, and I am best known for being the blind cook that won season 3 of MasterChef on Fox with judges like Gordon Ramsay, Joe Bastianich, and back when I was on the season, it was Graham Elliott. It's a national television show with all amateur home cooks. So I love food. I did not grow up cooking, but I taught myself how to cook when I was in college at the same time that I began losing my vision due to NMOSD. And then I was encouraged to go and audition for MasterChef while I was in graduate school for creative writing. And I went on the show thinking it would be a fun experience to just go through what it was like to be in Hollywood and film a television show. And I thought I would have a great short story or personal essay to come home and write about in school. And then I ended up winning that season. And then now I have 2 restaurants called The Blind Goat and Stuffed Belly in Huston.
That is an absolutely amazing story. Wow. I have like 107 questions to ask. Would you mind sharing with us the story of your diagnosis? Because I think it's a really, really important discussion to be had.
I experienced my first symptom of NMOSD in the form of optic neuritis or inflammation of the optic nerve when I was 20 years old. So I was in my 3rd year in college, and I noticed one of my eyes, the vision went blurry. I thought it was my contact lens, as many people probably of that age would think. So I changed out my contact lens, vision still blurry. I made an appointment with an optometrist. And then I was told at that visit that it wasn't anything to do with my eye, but it was something neurological. So I was referred to a neuro-ophthalmologist, and they ran the usual battery of tests. I had MRIs done, even a lumbar puncture, many blood tests, and they tried to pinpoint multiple sclerosis, but they could not find traces of that in any of my MRIs. So they figured it was just they told me it was just a freak accident. They gave me the intravenous corticosteroids to help calm the inflammation of the optic nerve, but I never regained back full vision in that eye. I ended up just learning how to get along in life with one good eye and one bad eye. So initially I had some issues with depth perception, but I eventually adjusted and I could still live life as normal. And then a couple years later, I experienced tingliness in one of my legs. And that led me again to another neuro-ophthalmologist, same usual tests, still no diagnosis. But because I had had 2 symptoms that point to MS at 2 different points in time on 2 different parts of my body, the doctor decided to diagnose me with MS. So I was put on MS therapies, which were the daily injections that I was on for a few years, but my health continued to deteriorate. So I continued to experience optic neuritis. I had more spinal cord inflammation. One attack was so bad that I became paralyzed from the neck down. And it took 9 months of both physical and occupational therapy and a lot of drug therapies before I could finally walk again and use my arms again. And I was then correctly diagnosed with NMOSD after my neurologist decided to send my blood work off to the Mayo Clinic to get tested when that biomarker had just come out. I was told that going on the corticosteroids may or may not help with the recovery of the vision, but it would speed up the recovery if it were to happen. So of course I was really hoping, because at that young age, you don't imagine that you would start losing your vision or even be diagnosed with some sort of chronic illness for the rest of your life. I was really hoping that my vision would return. And when it didn't, I think the doctors just said, well, we had a feeling it wouldn't come back. It may or may not come back ever again. So this is just your new normal.
One of the red flags that I think about when you're working someone up for an optic neuritis is incomplete recovery with an early attack.
Mhm.
In this setting of multiple sclerosis, when someone has an optic neuritis in the first several years, there's an extremely high likelihood that it'll fully recover or nearly fully recover.
Uh-huh.
NMOSD is not MS, and it's a much more severe disease, and the attacks are much more severe. And it's unfortunately all too common that someone with NMOSD has an optic neuritis and goes blind in that eye.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see someone who has an optic neuritis and they don't fully recover, that should be a red flag to the neurologist. Hey, this is a little bit unusual. How long was that period of time, like roughly between the optic neuritis and the numb and tingly?
It was about maybe roughly 2 years, more or less.
Okay. And during that time, you were living your best life with the exception of you had lost vision in that one eye.
Yes.
And during that, and I'm sorry to pelt you with questions, I'm just so curious. During that time, during those 2 years, were they seeing you in neurology clinics, or were they following you, or were you just kind of, okay, I had a bad thing happen and now I'm just off living my life?
It was the latter. So the doctors at the time wrote it off as, like I said, a kind of a random occurrence. And they couldn't really, and that was my issue, was not knowing why. I would always want to try to figure out why is this happening so that we can figure out what the next step would be. But the doctors really didn't have an answer, and they just said, we don't know. It could be stress. It could be something else. It just happened, and that's it.
I understand. And on behalf of doctors, I apologize to you. When you had the second event, the numb and tinglies, and then they did the workup and they said, hey, sister, we think this is multiple sclerosis. How did you take that information?
Initially, I would say very little of me was relieved. Most of me felt scared.
Yep.
I'd heard of MS before. I remember growing up and seeing brochures for fundraisers at school that we would do of people in wheelchairs that have MS. So I'd heard of the disease. I didn't know much about it. I knew that it had to do with some sort of disability. I didn't know that it had anything to do with possible vision loss.
Yep.
So I think mostly I was fearful of not knowing what to expect in my future.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. What prompted the neurologist to send off the NMO IgG antibody test when it became available?
Because regardless of the daily injections I was on, I continued to regress in my health. I continued to get attacks. The doctors also tried other treatments that were not helping, and every year I would continue to get multiple attacks on my optic nerves and my spinal cord. And so I think at that point the doctor was also feeling lost, I think, if my diagnosis was correct at all, because none of the drugs were working. None of the MS drugs were working for me.
So now we have these very eloquent antibody tests, and there are these cell-based assays which are very, very good at differentiating when someone has NMOSD. And as an MS neurologist, I feel that it is a best practice that when we work anyone up for MS, we need to send off those antibody tests. Mm-hmm. I hope that becomes a standard of care so that people don't have to go through the experience that you went through.
Right.
When you were told, wait a second, we were wrong, it wasn't MS, it was NMO, may I ask again, how did you handle that? That's a pretty big thing to be saddled with.
When I heard that I was going to be re-diagnosed with NMO, I was actually very much relieved. Okay. I think that it was harder to go through this life of thinking you had something and still going through the treatments that weren't fun, but still not doing better or not stabilizing. So when I was told that, okay, we were wrong, you actually have this disease, we're going to look into other courses of treatment for you that may be better for NMOSD, I was actually very relieved and very much looking forward to what would be next, because I felt like my philosophy in life is I'd rather know the bad news than not know, so that I can plan. I'm very much a planner. So
Amen.
I embraced that diagnosis, as strange as that may sound.
It actually makes a lot of sense the way that you explain it. I can't fathom what it would feel like to live with the uncertainty of, they say I have MS and I'm getting treated, but I'm still getting worse. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
So I follow that logic. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you have chosen to or not, you have sort of taken on a role of patient advocate.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just start by saying thank you for your bravery and your willingness to educate, because it helps other people feel less scared.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm so grateful for you even being willing to talk right now, because somebody listening to this needs to hear you, and they maybe didn't even know that they needed to hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was given some information about you, and it's very, very impressive stuff. But one of the things that really struck me were like tips that you had to help people live their best life despite having NMOSD. And I was hopeful that we could maybe go through those, just because I think they're brilliant. The first one is this concept of being your own advocate and writing your own story. Can you share with me the thoughts behind that, please?
Yes, I experienced firsthand what it was like to be a patient in the care of doctors who oftentimes, not at their fault, but who also don't know what's going on. So I think growing up, I was always taught that doctors, not to particular stereotype, but being Asian American, my Asian immigrant parents really pushed me to go into the medical field, because I thought doctors were the smartest, most respected profession out there, and everything doctors say is usually correct. So I grew up thinking whatever the doctor tells me, this must be 100% right. So when I was told that I had this disease, but this wasn't working, or I felt like I had certain symptoms that I felt like my doctor wasn't really following or understanding or taking the time to understand, I realized that doctors are also very much human, can be fallible, and healthcare is really something that's a teamwork. It's between the patient, caregivers, their family, their friends, the healthcare team, nurses, doctors, the technicians. It's all of these people that really dictate how well someone's particular treatment program can go. So for me, I started realizing that I had to be an educated patient. I had to advocate for myself so that I can get the best care that I felt possible for myself, in conjunction with advice and guidance from my healthcare team and my doctor. So when I say be your own advocate and write your own story, I truly believe that it's important for the patient to be proactive in learning as much as they can about their disease, their diagnosis, the optional treatments out there, the different, and there's not necessarily any one right way. And I think especially with things like NMOSD, your journey is so different from the next patient with NMOSD. So it's important for you to it's important for you to figure out what you need and how your body reacts, and then communicate this very well with your doctor and your healthcare team so that they can help you get the best treatment possible.
Very eloquently stated. I'm always of the opinion that it's a partnership. I presumably read some books that maybe someone else didn't read, which does not make me better or smarter. It just means I read some stuff. You are a you expert. You know more about you than any other human on earth.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can get together and become good listeners, we can probably game out what to do.
Right.
I love the way that you said that. Thank you. Another thing that I really caught my attention, you wrote that it's important to celebrate small victories to make a difference. And I so vehemently believe this, I could just like stomp and jump up and down, because I really feel like we have to grieve losses and celebrate victories. So would you share your thoughts on that? Because I'm just tickled that I read that, because I believe that very, very firmly.
Yeah, I think for myself, and I'm sure for many other people out there, I think we often feel down about ourselves when we feel like we failed something. And I think we put a lot of expectations on ourselves to achieve these big, lofty goals.
Mhm.
And then we forget that Rome wasn't built in a day. It doesn't, it's not that just because you couldn't climb all the way to the top of a ladder or something in one go doesn't mean that you're a complete failure. But some days are easier than others, and you have to delight in your small progresses that you make. So I'll give you a prime example
Please.
how I got back into cooking. So I taught myself how to cook before I had lost my vision. But
Okay.
every time I started experiencing more and more inflammation of the optic nerves, I would lose more vision and I would have to reteach myself how to cook. So I went from 1 year being able to cook an entire Thanksgiving meal for my family, the turkey and all the sides and everything, to the next year not being able to figure out how to put together a peanut butter jelly sandwich. And I
Wow.
remember thinking I will never be able to cook again. And that was one of my rock bottom moments. And I thought, how will I be an independent person if I can't feed myself? So I let myself pity myself for a little bit. And then I figured, okay, tomorrow's a new day. I'm going to just try again. And then I made the sandwich again and it wasn't perfect. There was probably still jelly on my running down my arm or on the counter, but I put two slices of bread together okay with some peanut butter jelly in between, and I was able to eat it. So I said, okay, today I made a peanut butter jelly sandwich. Next week I'll try scrambling an egg. Next week I'll try cutting an orange. And then it wasn't until a few weeks passed, and then I would think backwards and be like, oh, you know what? Last month I wasn't able to fry an egg. I wasn't able to make toast and eggs, and now I can. So then I started realizing you really have to celebrate the small victories and see all of your small accomplishments and give yourself that pat on the back so that that boosts your confidence, and then you realize you can keep going and moving forward, and it's not something that you can expect to always be successful 100% overnight, but it takes time and it's gradual and it's okay. Sometimes, like I said, some days are better than others. Some weeks you'll make more progress than previous weeks, but as long as you keep moving forward and you have that willpower and you remember to praise yourself for making the effort, then I think that's all good. And it's important, I think, especially for your mental well-being, to not always feel like you're failing when you're trying.
Brilliantly stated. Makes me think of the old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yes.
And it also leads us into your next tip, which is to give yourself grace.
Hmm.
When you say give yourself grace, can you share what you mean by that?
I think it really does tie into celebrating the small victories. I think I'm very hard on myself, and in some ways that, I know going through therapy that I've been told it's, growing up with parents who expect a lot from me. So then I in myself put very high expectations on myself. And in some ways there are benefits to that because I am a high achiever.
Mhm.
I tend to not settle for less. I expect a lot from myself. And I always try to over deliver. And that has allowed me to accomplish a lot of great things like winning Masterchef, opening restaurants, writing a cookbook, having the career that I do, and the able to do the advocacy work that I do. But I think at the same time, there's a balance to that. And I've noticed sometimes that I keep pushing forward, and I get tired
Mhm.
physically, mentally, emotionally. Get close to the point of burnout. And then I feel like it affects everything. It affects my mood, it affects my work, it affects how my relationships, how I deal with other people, how I communicate. And I think we often don't allow ourselves to just sit in these moments and accept them. We always feel like we need to always be better or always push forward. But I think sometimes there are days when we just need to accept where we are, and give ourselves grace for not being able to do everything that you thought you would accomplish that day. And it's okay. So I think a mantra that I often say to myself now that my at the encouragement of my therapist that said I need to say something nice to myself regularly. Is I always tell myself I'm right where I should be, no more, no less. So I think in some ways that means you need to give yourself grace to be in the moment of where you are and know that you shouldn't be anywhere anymore or any less than where you are right now, and it's okay.
That's really powerful. I am right where I need to be, no more, no less. I'm gonna borrow that if you don't mind.
Give
That's
me
really,
credit.
yeah, I promise I will. Your fourth tip is something that a lot of patients, a lot of human beings struggle with, and that's to accept help and support and to know your limits.
Mhm.
Can you please speak to that? I mean, you define a type A personality,
Yes.
and I assume that maybe there's challenges in having to ask for help sometimes. Can,
Yes.
can you talk to us about that, please?
Yes. I grew up an only child. My mother passed away when I was young, so I felt like I had to grow up very quickly. Um, I cherish my independence. My mom had always taught me like you need to be independent, like you need to learn to make your own money, learn how to, my dad told me you need to learn how to change a tire on your own car. You need to learn how to drive a manual car so that in
Yep.
case you ever need to drive someone else's car. So independence was always something I've been taught ever since I was very little. And then I think in some ways that drove my type A personality even farther because then I now felt like as a young adult, I was very controlling, very much a perfectionist. Everything had to be just right or just so. And it wasn't until I started losing my vision and then I was diagnosed with NMOSD that I realized I cannot do everything myself.
Yep.
At this point, I had no choice. Like before I learned to read Braille or learned how to use a screen reader, I had to get someone to help me read my mail. I had to get someone to help me go to the mailbox and get my mail. I needed help for someone to drive me to the doctor, to the grocery store, to the library. I realized I couldn't drive again by myself. So there were a lot of things that I could no longer do by myself or as an independent person, and I had no choice but to depend on my family and my friends. And so at first it was very hard, but I realized that in some ways it was liberating because now I didn't have a choice and I had to learn to be okay with accepting help from other people. And the more I asked help from other people, the more I realized that people around you really do want to serve and help as much as they can if you allow them to. And it helps
Yes.
them fulfill some sort of sense of purpose. They want to help. A lot of times, I think caregivers feel helpless when they don't know how to help the patient and their loved one. But when you push them away, they feel even more helpless. So when you say, I know you don't understand everything I'm going through and you possibly can't, but today, can you make me dinner? People will so gladly do that. And I think it's really this kind of synergy that works together that makes their lives feel fulfilling and purposeful. And then it helps you move forward in your life as well as you're trying to figure out your way with NMOSD. So for me, I think I'm fortunate that I had to learn the hard way
Yep.
that it is really important and okay to accept help and ask for help and depend on other people.
I'm so fortunate, and my viewers are so fortunate that we get to learn from you today. That was some nuggets of wisdom and well stated. I say frequently, you don't have the condition by yourself; you have it with your village. And what I heard you say was village members want to help, they just sometimes don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
And so giving them something they can do is a gift to them.
Yes.
And I just think that was so well stated. Thank you for sharing that. Wowzers. And NMOSD is considered a rare condition with between 15 and 17,000 people in the United States. There may be neurologists that have not seen NMOSD. And so helping people within the neuroimmunologic community become sensitized to this cousin of MS is so relevant and so important. And if things don't fit right, as you kind of shared in your early diagnosis, we have advances in technology, these antibody tests that absolutely should be sent off. And I hope that if somebody's listening to this and they have questions, that they maybe feel empowered to bring this up to their clinician. As we wrap up this powerhouse of a discussion, what would you like to leave us with as far as either thoughts or a message, something that people can take away? There's so much we can learn from you.
Mm-hmm. I think really to sum up a lot of the conversation we talked about and then the tips that we had talked about, I think one, it's very important to be your own best advocate because like you said, doctor, you know yourself best. You live in your body, you live in your brain, so you know how you're feeling. And oftentimes you know better than the doctors what your body is missing or what it needs.
Yep.
So I would say be your own best health advocate. Lean on other people, whether that's other patients who understand what you're going through. Because I remember when I was diagnosed, it was very early on in the NMOSD, just people talking about NMOSD. There really wasn't anything out there on the internet. I looked around. There weren't any other patients I'd ever met. A lot of the doctors I had gone through had not heard of this disease.
Yep.
So it's important to build that community, whether it's your family and friends who have known you before your diagnosis, but yet don't know what it's like to go through NMOSD, but are there to try to help you as best as they can. Or it could be other patients who maybe you just met because now you're suddenly part of this NMOSD community, but who can understand what it's like to go through optic neuritis or spinal cord inflammation or other neuropathic pain or these drug therapies or finding the right neurologist or neuro-ophthalmologist for yourself. And I think it's important to, especially in a lot of autoimmune conditions and for everyone in general, to learn to control your stress level. I think, stress, I always read, is sort of a good thing because it gets you to do things and helps you get things done. But too much stress, then your brain starts functioning and releasing so much cortisone, and then your body is always like tense, and then you're just always living in this like fight or flight mode. And so I think mental health is also very important in order to control your stress level, and understanding like there will be hard days in life. There will be harder things and challenges that come your way, but how you deal with it really can dictate the outcome and your perception of it. Like you cannot control the things that happen to you, but you can learn to control how you react to them. So all of these things, I think, really point to the NMOSD Won't Stop Me initiative that I'm doing with Amgen, and how March being the NMOSD Awareness Month, it's important to really talk about these tips and tidbits for other patients out there living with NMOSD and how they can become their own advocate, how they can learn to better their mental health and learn and lean on their caregivers as well. So I encourage people to go to nmosdwon'tstopme.com and read about other patients' stories and feel empowered when they hear other people's stories like mine, and then also connect with other people in the community, whether they're a patient themselves or a caregiver or just looking for resources and community out there in the NMOSD life.
That's brilliant, and I will put links in the description section below for people that want to check that out. I also wanted to ask you, where can we find your cookbooks?
So my cookbook, I do signed copies that I sell for on my website, theblindcook.com. That's also my Instagram and Facebook handle and YouTube and X as well. So if you go to theblindcook.com, you can purchase a signed copy of my cookbook.
I'm going to be looking at that website right away. Thank you again for all of your wisdom. It's been wonderful to talk to you. And I am certain that people listening to this are going to take away a lot. So until the next time we get to meet, thank you again. And thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Doctor.